Memphis Film Festival and Cinema. And it is my great pleasure to introduce the writer and the author of the book on which our featured film, How to Build a Girl, is based, Caitlin Moran. Welcome, Caitlin.
Oh, hello from London. I'm in your future. I'm 5 or 6 hours ahead of you, so I can tell you how the rest of your day is going to work out. You'll all be sitting at home doing absolutely nothing. That's welcome.
We're all equalized. Caitlin is almost needs no introduction. She is a journalist, and she's a journalist and author of How to Build a Girl, How to Be Famous, How to Be a Woman, and various other books, and is a columnist in the Times of London. And we're so happy to have you here to discuss this film. And we were just talking about it must be a little bit bittersweet to have, I imagine when to be releasing this film and be in probably the same room that you were when you wrote it, instead of on a red carpet. And so we really appreciate the strangeness of this moment. How is it for you?
Well, I'm kind of racked off because I wrote 10 years ago, I wrote a column saying that when and if I ever did my first ever red carpet, that I was going to overthrow all the societal conventions of women on red carpet. I wouldn't have a glow up. I wouldn't wear an amazing dress. I wouldn't wear heels. I would be dressed as one of the Ghostbusters, and I would have a fully operational proton pack on my back, and I would red carpet in sensible shoes and a jumpsuit. And instead I have no red carpet. I'm red carpeting here now in a polo neck in my office. So in a way, I've overthrown conventions. I'm certainly very comfortable. I'm not wearing a dress that makes me very chilly, but I also have not left the house for what seems like 400,000 years.
Well, we hope that you'll be able to rock the Ghostbusters outfit for the sequel, How to Be Famous, which is equally delightful. And I wanted to, when you're writing, you wrote this screenplay based on your novel. And I imagine when you were also writing the novel, or maybe even living these experiences in your mind, you had a sort of movie. And is that true?
Well, I mean, I think everybody thinks they're in the movie of their life, don't they? Like, kind of, that's, we've had so many successive generations, we've all been brought up on movies now. So we're sort of aware, we have our moment where we go, this is my low moment. This is the beginning of my second act. This is going to be my makeover. This is like the big battle at the end, or I'm going to overcome the baddies. We have those in our day-to-day life anyway. So yeah, I'm always astonished that, well, before I wrote a movie and made a movie, I was almost astonished that more people didn't write and make movies. Having made a movie, I can tell you it's really hard. Like, I spent like 30 years being a journalist interviewing filmmakers and rock stars and creative people. And now, retrospectively, I just want to go out to all of them and go, I get it. It's really hard to do a thing. Like, kind of, it takes longer than you would ever imagine. When I wrote this book and we started working on this film, it was before Fleabag happened, it was before Amy Schumer happened, it was before Lena Dunham happened, Beanie Feldstein, who's now the star of this film, hadn't even been born. It was 100,000 years ago. So yeah, it takes a really long time to make a thing, is the probably only insightful thing that I can tell anybody about the movie making process.
Well, I'm curious because in the process of, we have often a lot of filmmakers and aspiring filmmakers who tune in, and it's such an interesting model in the structure and changing from a novel to a screenplay. There were so many little details that her heroes on the wall who talked to her, some of the dogs. There were so many instances where things became much more visual and compact. Can you talk a little bit briefly about what you learned and that structure?
Yeah, well, I mean, I had to learn everything. I mean, I understand again now. I've done it all arse about tit, as we would say in the UK. So normally people who make a movie, they've studied it and they've read all the books, so they know about Sid Field, and about character arcs and journeys. And there's a bit where you have to go into the woods and meet a wise woman who gives you some information. I didn't know any of that. I've just just typey. I didn't even know things like show, don't tell. So that was the first big thing when I started adapting the book into a screenplay. It was just, you know, when you're a prose writer, you're just all tell. You're just tell. And realizing there were bits where you had to make a thing happen, show something instead. It took me a while to get my head around it. And once I did, I was like, oh God, okay, this is a whole new toolbox I can play with. Like, instead of someone having voices in her head, we can actually have those voices. They can be her heroes on the wall, because every teenage girl has pictures of her heroes on the wall. Every teenager has their heroes on the wall, and places they want to go, and inspiring quotes ripped out of magazines and stuff. And that's where we blueprint who we're going to be in the future. That's kind of like the experiment. That's where we're working out who we are. And the process is that you take like 2% of Courtney Love and 3% of Elizabeth Taylor and 4% David Bowie's trousers, and you kind of stick them all together, and you make the first iteration of yourself when you're 15 or 16, and you take that out in the world. And usually that first prototype explodes. You'll make a terrible fool of yourself, or you'll kiss the wrong person, or you'll get the wrong job. And so you go back to the drawing board, back to the bedroom wall, and go, okay, I'm going to lose 2% of this and try 5% of Michelle Obama instead. And then you build your second version, and you go out into the world. And that's why it's called How to Build a Girl. And the only misnomer in that is that you think when you're 16, that by the time you're, say, 18, you'll have done it. Your girl will be built, and that's who you're going to be for the rest of your life. And the big insight that I can tell you from the age of 45 is that you rebuild yourself every couple of years. That's your life's work, is to keep inventing yourself and reinventing yourself over and over again. And once you know that, life is kind of a joy, because you're going to be someone else in 2 years' time. Whatever mistakes this terrible person's making, you're not even going to know them in a couple of years' time. You're going to be something else completely incredible. So it kind of doesn't count.
Wonderful. That brings up one of my favorite aspects of this film, was that, I mean, we see the self-reinvention, and one of the greatest conventions in films is the makeover scene, and she in this is making over herself. Beanie Feldstein plays Johanna, who is probably a version of an autobiographical version of yourself, and yes. She has a makeover scene, and instead of it becoming, you know, she doesn't have a makeover scene become more conventionally attractive and get the guy. She has a makeover scene to express herself and become this like top hat wearing gothic kind of person. And it's in that, and I just absolutely love that. And I also loved that you got tapped into Beanie Feldstein's that her sexiness that we haven't been able to see so much, and that her sexiness isn't tied into that makeover. She's a sexual person. She's always a sexual person. She's always, and it's not in that's also not tied to her losing weight or becoming, you know, these kind of things that we often see in these kind of films.
Well, totally. Well, the two really key things that I wanted to do, the first one was, I think all girls know in the back of their head that it's kind of their duty at some point to become beautiful. That's what always happens in any film, and that's what has to happen in your life. We're all waiting for the moment where we become beautiful, and that's always the moment in a film, and it's always a very conventional kind of beauty. You take the glasses off and you straighten your hair and you wear the beautiful dress and you put the heels on and you come down the stairs and everyone goes, oh! And the thing that makes me as a feminist angry is that that idea of beauty is something that we've never had a vote in. That was just a conception of what beauty is that was decided 50 or 100 years ago, that's being reinforced over and over again. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to look beautiful. It's just, what does beautiful mean? And I think once you get girls together and I'll talk to them about what they actually find beautiful, it's not usually those conventional things. You know, Barbara Streisand's nose is beautiful. You know, Zadie Smith is beautiful. Like, kind of, it's not all this sort of blonde, white kind of heteronormative thing. So she becomes her idea of beautiful, which is a very important thing, which is this punk rock thing with red hair and a top hat to look like either Slash from Guns N' Roses or the Artful Dodger from the musical Oliver, because those are her reference points. And the second thing was with her sexuality. Again, what usually happens in movies is a man, usually an older man and a more knowing man, comes and discovers sexuality, comes and discovers her sexuality for her. A man awakens it. He kind of tells her that she's sexy. He shows her what sex is. And it was really important for me from the first scene in that movie that you see her before her makeover, when she's still kind of got her glasses on, she's got her hair in plaits and she's sort of dressed very shabbily. she has her sexuality at that point. She knows what she finds attractive. She knows what she wants to do. Sex isn't something that comes and happens on her. Sex isn't something that's brought into her life. She has sexuality from the get-go, because we do. We have hormones, you know, from the age of 13 onwards. You're a horny creature, and often your biggest motivation is to go out there and find someone that you want to do some sex on, rather than sitting there passively waiting for someone to come and have sex on you. So those are the two most important things that I wanted to do in it, in terms of who she was and what she looks like. She's decided her version of beautiful, and from the get-go, she wants to go out there and have her own sexual adventure. She's telling people what she finds attractive, not the other way around.
Absolutely, you nailed it. It was really refreshing to see, and of course, it comes from, and her whole journey, her whole dynamic comes from, essentially in the book as well, her masturbating from her sexuality, which is, I think you mentioned maybe why your kids kind of shy away from your work, but
yeah, no, I've got 2 teenage daughters, and they will never watch this film. They never watch my TV show. They never read any of my books, because there is always a character in them that's usually very much like me, who will be masturbating. And no teenage girl wants to know about their mum knocking one out. But I, from the get-go, like when I wrote, the first time I wrote about, so in the book, it opens with her masturbating, and it was a huge hoo-ha when the book came out, and whenever it was, 2012, I'd go on news shows, and the news anchors would be kind of going, why have you started a book with masturbation, a girl masturbating? And again, this is before Fleabag, this is before sort of Lena Dunham. And I was like, well, just because I think masturbation is an amazing hobby for a young woman, you know, it won't get you into trouble, it doesn't cost you any money, it doesn't make you put on weight, and it really chills you out. And like, there's a reason why we were invented with our hands. You know, our hands naturally rest right down there. And that's, you know, that's nature telling you what you need to do when you're feeling a bit edgy. So it's, you know, I'm a great proponent of masturbation. If you don't know what you like, how the hell is anyone else going to know?
Beautiful. Very good message for right now too.
Right, exactly. How else are we going to get through this lockdown, right? Especially if you're isolating at home. Oh my God, this is anything that's going to keep you going.
Absolutely. But I wanted, so Beanie Feldstein is so wonderful in the role, and I mean, she's just perfect. She's exactly what I imagined when I read it. Was it the same for you? I mean, you.
Oh my God! Well, I didn't realize that when I was writing the book and then doing the screenplay, that what I was writing was a role that was virtually uncastable, because it's a role that involves someone starting out at the age of 16. Clever and funny and well-read and kind of sort of weird and odd and incredibly optimistic and charismatic and charming, but innocent, who then goes to London and turns into like the queen bitch, kind of like destroying all these bands and kind of racketing around London like a crazy sex pirate, and then has her big revelation and kind of works out who she's got to be. And that character has to be in every scene, and that's virtually uncastable. You know, we were looking in the UK for young actresses that had not been discovered before to see if we could give someone their big break, and we couldn't find anyone. And we basically had, I mean, that's, thank God films take so long to make, because in the time that it took me to write the screenplay, Beanie Feldstein was conceived and born and went out and had an amazing career on Broadway and had all this experience. So when we finally had a finished script, she was just ready to take the role. But without her, we would not have this movie, because she is so radiant and so beautiful. I've been in rooms, I went to an early screening of Booksmart in London, and when Beanie Feldstein walks into a room of women, people freak out, because she's not just an actor, she's a thing. She's the first example of a talented, brilliant, young, big girl that I can think of who hasn't been punished for it. She hasn't had to like struggle in a really awful way. She hasn't had to compromise herself. There isn't any sorrow in her story. She's just come along, and she's unashamedly brilliant and optimistic and talented and astonishing. And that's so refreshing to see as a woman, and particularly for young girls, to just see this girl who's come along, who's just like, it's great to be a woman. I haven't been punished. I haven't had to pay some kind of toll. I haven't had to compromise myself. I've just been like this since the day I was born. And isn't it amazing? And boys have so many role models like that, and girls don't. So it's the great honor of my life that Beanie's in this film. And I can't tell you how wonderful it is that I can pick up my phone at any point and just text Beanie Feldstein. When I tell people this, they're like, I'm so jealous. And I'm like, you should be.
She's amazing. She's so charismatic in all of those things, and we got to see aspects of her that we hadn't seen before in your film. Also great. Well, I need to ask, how does she do? I mean, I'm sure you've already covered this, but she does a notoriously difficult British accent. I think probably one of the hardest British accents, aside from like the Geordie accent, is the Wolverhampton accent. And I think it's pretty good, but I'm no expert. How is it?
Well, I can't do the Wolvo accent anymore. I was brought up there and I've lived in London long enough to have the edges knocked off. And she would come to me and go, how would I say this word? And I'd be like, oh, try to remember. Oh, I can't quite remember. The accent's really difficult, Bev. It's really tricky. I've lost it. But she was astonishing. As she pointed out when she came, when we had the meeting, and she was like, she felt that she had to convince us to give her the role. We'd obviously all decided in our head we were going to give her the role. And she was like, even if you cast a British actor, they will find it really difficult. So there's no difference in it being an actor from London struggling with this accent and someone from LA struggling with this accent. It's going to be really difficult. And she was completely correct. And she was so dedicated. She went and lived in Wolverhampton for 3 weeks. And it was at that point we realized how lucky we were to have an American actor play this role, because no British actor would have gone and lived in Wolverhampton for 3 weeks because they know what it's like. But she was innocent enough. We could take advantage of her. Her agent was too slow. They didn't shut that down. And she had to go and live there for 3 weeks and learn the accent, and she nailed it, man.
That's so funny. And yeah, she's so smart. She's absolutely smart about anyone having to learn the accent. The other amazing casting, and to me this was also exactly like the book, was John Kite. You have Alfie Allen, who
Yes.
was amazing. He's like liquid and transparent and romantic, and and I worked in the music industry before. I worked in film, and you always see the sort of dumb jock, I'm the golden god kind of rock star, and I'm so used to these sort of like romantic poets, these blue collar oracles, and I never see that, and it was so perfect.
Right. Okay. So you've been in the music industry, so you get it. So this is what always blew my mind. Whenever there'd be something that had rock stars in, whether it be a book or a TV show or a movie, they're always the same guy. They're always in like leather trousers and sunglasses, and they're a bit dumb and they're a bit wasted, and they've got a bottle of whiskey at 4 o'clock in the morning, and they're just a bit of a dick. And those aren't the rock stars that I used to interview when I was 16. They were all working class boys who were really well read, who really looked after me. Like it was the other writers that were dangerous, predatory men who were kind of pretentious and awful and drinking whiskey at 2 o'clock in the morning. The rock stars treated me like a little sister. They looked after me. And I really wanted to pay tribute to sort of working class singer-songwriters with hearts of gold, and put them first of all in a book and in a movie. And I knew that I wanted to cast Alfie years ago, because I go to the Glastonbury Festival every year, and Alfie goes every year, and I didn't know him, but I once watched him walk through the backstage area wearing a sort of floor-length kind of Sherlock style coat, about 3 o'clock in the morning, holding a pint in his hand. And he'd had a good night, and he at one point fell and kind of rolled and got back up again with the pint still intact, and so turned around to everybody, bowed, and then carried on walking. And I was like, that's John Kite. He's just trying to be noble and dignified, even though he's off his face. That's my boy. So the very first casting meeting we had, I launched into this rhapsody about how much I love Alfie Allen and how he'd be perfect for the role, and I'd seen him do all this. And then the table went quiet, and then I remembered that one of the producers is his mum, and I had just done this 10-minute speech about how hot he was. And how were I younger or he older, I would like to do him into the beginning of next week. And she was like, that's my son. That's inappropriate of you to say that. And yeah, it's one of the reasons why they don't generally let me into meetings, because I will end up accidentally saying something like that. But it meant to be, let's put it that way. It was easy to put that phone call in.
That's so funny. He's absolutely perfect, and he's absolutely beautiful, but he's also just so articulate in the nicknames, calling Duchess. There was something so authentic to that relationship that I hadn't seen. So I thank you for that.
Oh, thank you. I love that character, and I love their relationship, because I also wanted it to be that at the end, I mean, I'm kind of spoiling the movie for people who haven't seen it, but the book's been out for years, that I wanted it to be, you would expect at the end of that for them to be going out with each other. That's always how those things have to ask, like the ultimate prizes that become lovers. But in this, the ultimate prize is, he says, will you do me the honor of being my friend? And I thought that was such a beautiful thing. I had never seen two young heterosexual leads have that moment where it's like, will you be my friend? And that's, yeah, when they did that scene, I had tears in my eyes. I was like, yes. Because what I always thought I wanted to do when I made a movie was make a list of all the things I hadn't seen in a movie that I knew would make me happy and that would feed my soul and maybe feed the souls of others. And I had a list of 100 things, and that was one of the things that I had on there. Because the big thing that I want to tell anybody out there, if you want to make a movie or you want to be a writer or you want to be creative, particularly if you're a girl or you come from some kind of minority, you're of a different color or religion or LGBTQ, is that I didn't start till I was really late, because I knew I wanted to write movies and tell stories, but I thought that I had to make movies and tell stories like the ones that existed. So I thought if I was going to make a film, it would have to be about a teenage boy who had a magical power like the Force, and then some robots turn up and they go on a mission and they blow up a Death Star. And I was like, well, I don't have a story like that, so I guess I can never make a movie. And then it took me till I was 32 to go, okay, well, those movies already exist and I can't do anything like that. But if I turn over here to all the movies that aren't being made and all the stories that aren't being told, maybe that's where I need to be digging in. And once you go to the dark place, the quiet place where things haven't been done yet, and start going, what's in here? What haven't we done yet? Like, oh, I'll have a bit of this and have a bit of that and start making my list. That's when you suddenly come alive as a storyteller, because you're like, okay, well, I'm going to die not having made half the movies I want to make because there's a million things I haven't seen and I need to start making that list now.
Oh, absolutely. That's so much part of our message with a lot of our filmmakers who we work with. There's like, it's so hard to deprogram yourself though, from like, oh, I should probably make this movie that's exactly like these other movies I've seen. And then once you did, your description is so right. It's like a huge forest of things, of just doing the same things in a different way. One thing that we talked about, you just mentioned lots of different kinds of diversity, but there's a diversity in this that is the lead character she's from she's on benefits, what we would call welfare, or she's on a council estate, she's like a housing projects. She's absolutely poor and filled, in a house filled with love, but absolutely poor. She ends up becoming sort of the breadwinner of her family at 16 by writing journalism, or the provider of her family. And that's something that that I feel like is the last area of diversity to tackle, is like class. And like, don't you think so?
Well, because it informs everything. Because particularly in the UK, like so much of the films that we make and the stories we tell are about middle class or upper class people, the aristocracy, royalty. We're addicted to making those period movies. And growing up, I was constantly frustrated because the kind of dramas that we'll see on the BBC, I mean, they make a lot of stuff, but generally it would be about a middle-class, middle-aged man who'd be like standing looking out of his patio windows at his beautiful garden, kind of fraught because he's having an affair with someone younger, and it's just sort of tiny little things about sort of, just sort of love and sort of like this abstract stuff. And those are the plots. And it's like, no, if you're poor, 90% of your plots, 90% of what you're doing is, how are you going to make money? How is bitch going to make rent this week? Like, kind of, that's what fills your day. That's what makes your decisions. That's what's going to guide you. Those are your inciting incidents. That's the ticking clock. These are the things that are going to drive you on. How are you going to make money? And, I'm increasingly uninterested in films where money is never referred to, and people seem to live in this bubble where they can just float around doing things and having arguments and going on adventures in which money is never discussed. They can just do whatever they want. That's not interesting to me. Like, you want the grind of like, okay, you've got a big dream, but the very first thing you've got to do is find shoes. You might not have a coat. Like, how are you going to get from one side of the city to another? Those are the big adventures that fill up most of our lives. And you can have just as much fun and sex and thrill and adventure based on those real things. And it that nourishes my soul more than anything else. I don't really, when Batman, every time Batman has a problem, his answer is just to buy a bigger piece of equipment and then use it to kill someone. It's like, well, that's no fun. Like, great, okay, Batman's got to be brave and buy a bigger car. Great, like, I don't care.
No, absolutely. And even worse than, it's very bad in the British film industry, and it's a little bit more hidden, the sort of middle classness in American films. But even worse sometimes than just these like rich upper class stories is middle class and upper middle class people making movies about poverty. I so often will hear, they'll be like, oh, how bizarre to see, they want everything about poverty to be black and white and dire. And
there's also this horrible trope that when middle class people write working class characters, I'm quite militant about this. Like, I find it 9 times out of 10, I don't like men to write female characters, because I just don't think they get them to do ridiculous things that women wouldn't do. And similarly, when you see middle class people write poor people, they have this kind of belief that we're like just more elemental and truth-telly. Like we turn up like kind of the sort of the normal people who have some money and a middle class are kind of like, you know, having their fun and their jokes and coming up with their plans. And then the poor person comes in and goes, oh, you guys are just so posh and completely disconnected from reality. I'm here to give you a reality check. And that's all we do. Or we're so crazy, and like if you come and visit our estate, we're like setting fire to bins and having sex on cars and dealing drugs and standing up and quoting poetry in a pub at 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like, you're making it sound like we live in a zoo. Like kind of, it's just like, you know, we have, you know, we're just trying to get through the day. We're just as imaginative and sensitive and kind of multifaceted as you guys. We don't just turn up to occasionally slap middle class people down into their places, mainly because we don't meet middle class people. It's a very stratified class system. Like if I was meeting anyone middle class when I was a teenager, I wasn't bothering to puncture their crazy plans. I was working out how to break into their house and steal their furniture. Or marry their rich sons and inherit their castles. That was my other big plan. I will be a fortune hunter. I will woo your son and then I will take your money.
Middle class, I think, yeah, working class people, I think, are also blessed with great imaginations because it's a necessity for life to be able to have this, right?
Well, this is the thing. All we have is words. Like we live in a, you know, I was home educated as well, and my parents. This is why lockdown has been really easy for me. My parents were like kind of apocalypse believing hippies. There were 8 of us. We were in a tiny house. We were home educated. We never left the house. People weren't allowed in, and my parents were always preparing us for the breakdown in society. So when this happened, I was like, wow, spend my entire life preparing for this. This feels completely normal. And so if you don't go anywhere and you haven't got any stuff, all you have is words. You're just amusing each other all the time. All you can give each other is jokes. All you can do is describe things in increasingly inventive and ridiculous ways to make each other laugh. And you're so tapped into culture because the TV's there in the corner of the room and that's free. So you're watching everything that's going on and you become very multi-referential. Like we would just talk to each other in quotes from TV shows that we loved, quotes from films that we love. We would pretend to be the characters in films and we would get all those reference points. We would just talk in the voices of other people for days because there wasn't anything else to do, which sets you up so well to be a writer. Like kind of, we were just doing that to amuse ourselves. All I did was just start writing it down after a while and getting sweet money for it.
That's perfect. You know, something that I wanted to talk to you about was, you know, this is a story about about you being able to make a living and change your life as a teenage writer. Do you think that's possible now? Or has the writing world, do you think a 16-year-old could make you know, light the criticism world on fire and change her life? I was thinking about it and I'm not sure if it is just because the writing world, the money aspect has changed so much. What do you think?
It's the money. So you could set the criticism world on fire. Like you can get a blog out there that'll go viral. And we've seen, you know, writers of, you know, sort of the next 2 generations do that over the last 5 or 10 years and suddenly become notorious and sort of become big writers. But the big difference between when I did it and now is that when I started off as a writer, like writing for the music press was the big way into the media in the UK. In almost every other aspect of media, you need to have gone to Oxford or Cambridge and been middle class and made those connections and you work your way through and you ring someone's dad and they give you a job. And the one way you could get in if you were working class was the music press because you would just send them a review and if they liked it, they'd publish it and they'd pay you for it. So from day one, you were learning on the job and you were getting paid for it and that was all you had to do. And now you could write a blog that would probably be seen by more people than anything that I ever wrote then, but you wouldn't be getting paid for it. So you would, in order to be able to do that full time, and you know, do your 10,000 hours and learn your skill, you would have to have rich parents who would be supporting you so you could do it full time, or you'd have to have a proper job and then be doing that part time. And that of course puts you at an immediate class disadvantage if you're poorer because you're only starting to work at 6 o'clock at night when you finished your other job, so you're tired. You know, the middle class kid who's living with their parents has had all day fresh to write and just use their brain. You're coming to it after a 10-hour shift in a cafe and you're now having to write until 2 o'clock in the morning to try and catch up. So that's the, you know, that's the one big difference. But that's something that we could change with our spending habits. Like it's the same with people in the music industry, like the amount of people that I know in bands who go, I can't get a record deal, I can't make any money. And I'll go, well, show me your iPhone. Like, how many songs have you got on there that you've listened to for free in the last 2 months? And they'll be like, 50,000 songs. And I didn't pay any money for them. And I'll be like, well, you downloaded your future for free. Like, you downloaded your career for free. There's no money in the system, so you can't now get it back. And it's the same with writing. We're not used to paying for newspapers or to read articles anymore. We just click for free, which is all great until you want to be in that industry and get some money. And then suddenly you're like, oh no, there's no money. Oh no, that partly that's my fault.
Yeah. I mean, it's very complicated. And we see that class difference being, exaggerated in, it was probably true that there were very few working class and people from poor backgrounds when you were getting started. And I think that's even more true now in writing and in music and in film. And it's hard to know exactly how to bridge that, especially when there's this great divide of when people are not making money and people who have, trust funds or the parents can help them float through that to get those big paychecks. And without that middle period is so rough for people who don't have that cushion.
And that's why competitions are so important. Like, I got my first job as a journalist on a national newspaper from a competition. They had a Young Journalist of the Year competition for the Observer in this country, and I entered it and they gave me a column. And so now whenever I'm asked to be a judge, I will always judge, because people are looking for talent. They are looking for working class talent. It's just they don't realize that you've got to invite them. You've got to have a competition and say, I'm opening the doors, because otherwise, if you don't live in the city where all these things are happening, the media just seems like this completely smooth, impenetrable citadel with no doors. And you're like, well, how do I get into it? And competitions are the days where they open the doors and go, come in through here. We are inviting you in. Sort of, people will read this. We are genuinely looking for you. So I think some people are kind of like, oh no, entering a competition is a bit tacky, or kind of like, I should do it another way. But always enter a competition, because there's always judges like me sitting there waiting, wanting someone brilliant from a weird background to just send something in that's different to everybody else. And of course, the advantage you have in a system where one class dominates, which it does, the middle and upper classes, or the wealthy people, then when you are a working class voice, you sound so different, and you have so many different stories, and you have information they don't know, and you have experiential stuff that you can talk about that no one has, that your stuff just sticks out and glows like a beacon. And people are like, oh my God, that feels real. This is amazing. Okay, I'm going to eat this up with a spoon. So enter competitions. I cannot recommend that highly enough.
Great. And we have some with Indie Memphis. We have a screenwriting contest that we're in the middle of. One thing that we also try to do is there are contests that just give you, acknowledgement, and then there are contests that give you money. And we're one of the contests that try to give you money, and so that you can get to those next levels. So look for those, because they exist. I am going to open it up to questions. So if you are on Zoom and you have questions, please use the Q&A box, or you can raise your hand, do the raise your hand icon, and we'll call on you. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please just go ahead and type a question into the comments box, and it will get to me and to Caitlin. While we're waiting for the questions to come in, Caitlin, I wanted to ask you what we've been asking all of our other guests, of just what you've been watching. And I mean, as someone who's a writer and the child of doomsday preppers, as you just said, the quarantine is not that different from the rest of your life. But have you found yourself watching anything or reading anything different and having more downtime? What have you been exploring?
Well, no, my working life is exactly the same, but I always cram stuff in. So the new Hilary Mantel novel came out, the last in the trilogy about the Tudors and Thomas Cromwell, which is extraordinary. So I ate that up with a spoon. I'm a huge fan of Rick and Morty. I just think that's extraordinary. As a big fan of Doctor Who, I love the fact that every single episode of Rick and Morty is about 6 episodes of Doctor Who crammed together, but dirty and filthy. Like, kind of just like, it's a horrible, dark version of Doctor Who, which ticks all my boxes. I'm a massive fan of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. I've probably seen every episode of that, because that's about a load of people just stuck together with nothing to do. So that's perfect lockdown watching. They're just stuck in a box, and they're all awful, and they all hate each other, and they're just amusing themselves. So yeah, It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia is a great watch to have. But I find it difficult, like, now I make movies, I feel like I should watch more proper movies and the classic movies, but I've still never really watched any of, like, when you see a list of the 100 greatest movies ever made, it's always things like The Godfather, and like, it's just things where men are shooting each other. Men have got plans, men are getting stuff, and men are shooting each other. And then all that stuff really turns me off. But then when you look at a list of the 100 greatest musicals ever made, they're suddenly about girls, and they're usually about poor girls or weird girls, who were sort of on the outsides of society, who are cheerful, and they've, instead of being beautiful and standing there and having no dialogue as they would have in a Martin Scorsese movie, they are the funny ones, and they have a skill. They're going to dance, they're going to sing, and they change their lives with their skills and the talents, and they're always really funny. So I am just still watching the 100 greatest musicals ever made, and I still have not really watched any of The Godfather. I've only seen the scene where Marlon Brando is having to babysit his grandchildren, and he finds it so onerous that he has a heart attack and dies. And I think that, for me, is the greatest ever. I would meme that. what an important businessman does if he has to look after 2 children for more than 5 minutes. He will die.
And if you're watching all of these musicals, I hope there's a part of me that hopes and prays you are writing a musical for Beanie Feldstein, who is a musical talent. That would be the dream movie. I hope that this is in our future.
Yes, I can't talk. I don't know if you can see in the background, I've got all my whiteboards with all my future projects over here. Unfortunately, a gust of wind blew in and took off some of the really important Post-it notes, so I don't really know what happens in my Act 2 at the moment, but because they're all over the floor, and the dog ate one of them. But yeah, we're cooking up. I've got a little thing that I'm working off of Beanie, and I just like films where people start singing. So yeah, I'll be taking advantage of that skill set.
That is so exciting. Okay, so there's a question in the box from Megan. As a writer, which processes have you enjoyed more? Writing fiction, a memoir, articles, or your screenplay? And how has the process of composing each been different? It's a big question.
Yeah, no. Well, I do words, so that's good. I would recommend to anyone who wants to be creative to do all of them, because what often will take so much time is getting an idea and trying to make it work in a format. You'll get an idea and you're trying to make it work in a movie, and then it can take you like 2 or 3 weeks of working on this to realize, oh no, it'd be better if it worked as a piece of prose. I should be writing that in a book instead. Or you'll be trying to write a piece of fiction, and then you'll go, oh no, this would be better if it was non-fiction, if it was simply memoir or confessional. And if you can, it actually saves you time if you're working on projects in all these different genres, because whatever idea you can have, you'll find a place where it fits really quickly rather than trying to shoehorn it into whatever project you got. So unfortunately, my advice is to do more work, but it actually means that you have less work to do, because you just fit in some way. You're not trying to cram it in somewhere else. When people talk about kill your babies, it's usually because that baby could just simply be cut and pasted from this project and put into that project there. And the time that you're wasting trying to make it work in something else is suddenly freed up.
Wonderful. And it sounds like this new process of writing a screenplay has completely, now the process must be much easier. Do you have any tips for new screenwriters?
I'm so addicted to screenwriting now. I just wish I'd started it, because I went through a box of old paperwork a couple of days ago, and I found the scripts that I started writing when I was 10, and I see then that I was trying to write about middle-class people having affairs even though I was 10. It's so weird. And it took me till I was 32 to realize the stuff I should be writing about was the life that I had then, like a weird 10-year-old girl in this big house, and with these big ideas and stuff. So I love with movies the fact that you can just, you can put one song on and move through a whole history in 30 seconds. There are things now that I watch and I just go, oh, that's like at the beginning of Jojo Rabbit, where Taika Waititi sets up the entire premise by having the German version of the Beatles' I Wanna Hold Your Hand over footage of Nazi rallies, thus setting up the entire thing so beautifully without a word of dialogue, which is that for kids growing up in Germany at that time, Hitler was like a rock star. They were just fans. That's what the Nazi youth was, and that's what this whole movie is going to be about. How could these people, follow Hitler down this terrible path? Because to them, he was a rock star. He was charismatic. When you see something like that just does, a book can't do that, a memoir can't do that. That's the kind of brilliant thing that a movie can do. Those are the things that and it's always use of music as well. This is one thing you can't do in coming from having been a music journalist, like at the end of The Social Network, where they've got Mark Zuckerberg just pressing refresh on his Facebook page, and How Does It Feel to Be One of the Beautiful People by the Beatles just fades up, which just sums up the entire theme of the movie in this brilliant underused Beatles song. And how many underused Beatles songs are there? those are the moments now that just set me alight. And you can see I want to write a musical, basically. All the examples that I'm giving you music, I just want to take a great song and make something amazing happen with it. Use someone else's great tune for my thing.
It seems inevitable with your background in music. That's so beautiful. I love that. Yeah. You've been watching all these musicals. Do you have favorite musicals? Do you love the rock musicals, or do you just like all of them?
I love Jesus Christ Superstar. I think is extraordinary. It is the greatest telling of the story of the Bible. It's because it's a funky telling of the Bible story, which is just extraordinary. I love Hairspray. I remember going to see the remake of that, the fairly recent musical remake of that, and just it was the first time I'd seen, like, again, the setup for that at the beginning of that is just extraordinary. And a girl like her, and you know, she just doesn't care about her size. She's just unfailingly optimistic. She's so like me and all the characters that I write. That I love that. My one heartbreak is that I've wanted to do a remake of the musical Oliver, a modern remake, because to me it seems that plot is obviously that they are, I would take the age up a bit, and that all those young people, they're not children, they're sort of teens and early 20s, and they're all rent boys, and Fagin is their pimp, and Bill Sikes is this horrible homophobic thug, and they would all just be this. It would just be this brilliant gay retelling of the story of Oliver Twist set in Soho in the 1950s in London. And I tried so hard to get those rights, and oddly, Lionel Bart's estate won't let me take all those musical numbers and reconfigure them as a big gay masterpiece. So back to the drawing board on that one.
Let's see. There's a question on YouTube of the character of Johanna encounters much sexism in the writing world. Do you think that this has changed post Weinstein, and that the world that she would encounter now is different, or are things similar?
I think it is very different. In the 90s, the sexism was really quite overt. And the big thing that's happened in the last 30 years is down to feminism. Feminism is, and the internet, you know, in many ways, the internet is a toxic place for women. And some of the conversations around feminism have become, you know, divisive and argumentative and furious. But the brilliant thing that feminism and the internet have conspired to do is we have come up with this whole new language, so that when things were happening to me in the 90s, I would just think, oh, this is my fault. I have put myself in a terrible situation. And all the girls of my generation, we would generally blame ourselves for bad things that happen. But now we have this whole vocabulary that explains things and lets us know that it's part of a wider phenomenon. We have things like the Bechdel test. We can talk about sexual harassment. We can talk about Me Too. We can talk about gaslighting. We have these words that suddenly allow us to identify what is a global problem, rather than when you were on your own in the 90s just thinking, oh, that's just me, I've made this bad thing happen. So when I encountered sexism in the 90s, I didn't know how to deal with it, and the only way that I could deal with it, bad men, was to treat them like my younger brothers. So there's a scene in the film which literally happened to me. I was 16, I was asking for a promotion, and which I richly deserved, and the editor just went, come and sit on my lap and talk about it. And I sort of looked around the room, and all the men were kind of sniggering. It was all sort of quite funny for them. And so I just sort of thought, what am I going to do? And then I just slammed myself down on his lap and bounced up and down until he lost all the circulation in his legs and he was in terrible pain. And at the end of it, he went, okay, you've had your promotion. And by treating him like a younger brother and basically causing him great physical pain, that was how I overcame the first instance of sexual harassment that I encountered. But now I would be able to simply blog about it, be really angry about it, and have millions of people turn up at his workplace and call for him to be fired.
No, absolutely. There's that scene. It's so funny, but there's also this like underlying pain of like she's taking control of that moment, but she doesn't really have any other options. And you're so aware of like you know, of like twisting it and making it the power that she has to twist it, but then also the sad powerlessness of just having to be in that room. It's very effective and very.
Well, there's also the sadness of the persona that, I mean, she's constructed this persona with the top hat and the red hair and the cigarette, and she's kind of a feisty kind of lady about town. But that is a persona that you have to construct if you're a young, innocent woman going into a world of older, knowing men. You've got two options. You can either turn up as the kind of, you know, teenage innocent that you are and be taken advantage of, or you see the characters in movies and stuff and go, right, I'm going to be a feisty dame, I'm going to be a broad, like kind of, I'm going to project this kind of, this persona that isn't me, but that's going to protect me in this world of men. That's the only option that I have now. And that's the persona that, although it sort of, you know, gives her the confidence initially to go out into this world of men, that's the persona that she has to deconstruct at the end, because you can't be that forever. The thing about constructing these shields that, you know, women so often have to do is that after a while they confine you. You know, you can't grow in them, you can't dance in them and be joyful in them. And so we create these vessels for a while to get through a situation, but then the job is to break them apart and turn into something else. And that was like, with the movie, the thing that interested me the most in, because it seems like it's a period movie about a sort of very specific story, like she's a 16-year-old girl who suddenly gets this national platform to write about music, and which was my story, and at the time I was probably the only 16-year-old girl in the country, or maybe the world, that could talk about her opinions. And when I first started on that magazine, I did it because I loved the music. I was a fan. I turned up there and I loved the stuff, and I'm just like, hurrah for music, hurrah for rock stars. And it was very quickly made apparent to me by the men there that that was not what you were supposed to do if you were a rock critic. You were supposed to be cynical, you were supposed to tear bands down, you were supposed to kind of destroy. And so I became the best of that. I was horrible. And around the time I made my first rock star cry, I was just like, this isn't me. I wanted to be a fan, and I had to learn to have the bravery to go back to being a fan and saying, I love stuff. And the reason that I wanted to make the movie now is because now every 16-year-old has a platform where they can talk about what they love and their feelings. It's social media, and we all go through the same journey on social media. You turn up as a fan being cheerful, going, here's a picture of me looking cute, and here's a picture of my dog looking cute, and here's my beautiful breakfast. And then someone turns up and goes, well, you look fat, and your dog looks fat, and your breakfast looks fat. And gradually we start to be snarky and we attack back. And in the end, your social media feed is just you being attacked and attacking people. And there has to come a point where you go, no, that's not what this technology is for. That's not what I'm about. I'm going to have the balls and the bravery to just be an optimist and positive and love things and be a fan of things. And so that was why I was so excited about being able to make this movie now, even though it seems like a period movie about something very specific. It is actually the story about how all teenagers start communicating in the world. And I just wanted to show them a story of a girl going through the exact same choices that they're making and going, well, this is what will happen. Like, maybe I can save you a year of being horrible on the internet if you just watch this story.
Oh, well, that's beautiful, and that's, I think, a perfect place to end, because we've run out of time. But How to Build a Girl is from IFC Films on all VOD platforms, and it's our featured film of the week, and we absolutely love it. And it was such a pleasure to talk to you, Caitlin. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's been so lovely. I feel kind of sad that I've got to go back and talk to my kids now. It's been so lovely being with you. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks again. And everyone, please, if you haven't seen the film yet, please watch it. And if you have, maybe watch it again and read the book that it's based on. Bye, Caitlin.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye.